Power to the People Pleasers. My name is Amy Ballantyne, and I'm so excited to have my guest, Toby, here today. Welcome, Toby.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Toby, you are a woman doing many things. You're a transition and life coach, helping people to go through transitions, find and activate their path. You're helping people with all sorts of things, what job to take, whether they want to retire, if they're satisfied or not in their current positions, when they're stuck in a rut. You're helping people in a lot of ways. And I really appreciate you being here on the episode with us today. And before we dig into our topic of saboteurs, I would love to know, have you ever been a people pleaser? And if so, what did that look like in your life?
Yeah, I am not a people pleaser. I do. It does feel like there's an epidemic of people pleasers. Like I don't know what it is that's happening in childhood that's creating that, but for whatever reason, in the environment I grew up in, that is not a skill, I'll call it, or not an issue. Whatever your perspective is, that is not something I developed.
So, why do you think that is?
I
I'm so
don't know.
curious.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, they say that people pleasing is one of those things that you develop as a child to survive, and that'll get to the topic, which is the saboteurs. And in my environment, I think I was challenged to be myself and ask for what I want. My family is fairly direct, almost sometimes probably too direct. If you We could have a whole conversation about radical candor, and there's the quadrants of radical candor, and radical candor is the optimum. And then I think if you're direct without caring, it can be overt aggression. I
Mm.
think in my family sometimes we're on the line there
Mm.
between radical candor and overt aggression.
Wow, wow. And so you didn't develop the saboteur of people pleasing. What came up for you? I mean, if we're talking about what we developed in childhood, I'd love to know. What are your saboteurs?
Oh, my saboteur. So my top two saboteurs are hyperachiever and hyper rational.
Mm,
And
mm,
to round it out, I have controller. Is it? It's not a great combination. Controller and restless rounded out at the top four.
So, for those people listening, Toby and I are using common language here because we have been introduced to a concept called positive intelligence by Shirzad Chamine. And we both actually took his training course for coaches on this incredible tool called positive intelligence. Can you tell a little bit more about the assessment and more about this resource for people, Toby?
Yeah, I find it very, very interesting. So the concept is that Shirzad did root cause analysis, or what he calls factor analysis, which is getting down to the root cause of all form of stress, of what the things that create stress in people. And there were nine things. When it got down to the root of them, there were just nine. And if you could figure out how to have self command over those nine stressors, you can avoid going into a stress reaction. And a large proportion of people, when they're stressed, go into sort of a victim mode, which gets to another assessment that I do through my coaching program called Energy Leadership Index,
Mm.
which talks about like how you show up under a normal day, and then how you show up under a stressful day. And so people, if their saboteurs are triggered, they go into a stress mode. And that is something that is built up over time from your childhood. The theory being, as a child, maybe up to the age of 5, it's all about survival instinct. And to survive, you need the love of your parents. And so you're going to do what you need to do to make your parents happy. And that's how your saboteurs develop. So they worked really well for you, probably all through childhood. And it isn't until later that those saboteurs may end up creating problems for you. And so in your childhood, you developed these pathways. Your response becomes sort of built into your brain synapses. And what the saboteur assessment does is try to help you figure out how to get self command over that, not go to your natural default stress reaction, but instead find more sage responses to the situation.
Mhm. And as I was preparing for this conversation with you, I was like, I better go back. and look up what my saboteurs are, and no one's going to be surprised that my top saboteur is pleaser. And I think it's out of 10. Is that right? The rating out of 10. Does that
Yeah, it's
sound?
out of 10,
Yeah.
yes.
So mine is an 8 out of 10. My pleaser was the highest, and then hyperachiever was at a 6. So those were my top two saboteurs that have been ruling. So it's not shocking to me. Now I've got this podcast happening.
And do those ever fight each other? Because it feels like those could sometimes be in conflict.
Absolutely, absolutely. This high need. Now, my hyperachiever is a 6, so it is again less than the pleaser. So the pleaser usually rules out. However, I do find myself in that state of conflict sometimes where I'm like, no, I want to achieve this next thing. I want to go for this thing, but then I'm battling the feelings around. Well, will that mean that people don't like me? And how can I please others in this state? So I still do call myself a recovering people pleaser because I am a work in progress. But it's interesting that this resource helps us, this positive intelligence resource helps us to understand the things that are how we show up in that stressful state based on how we grew up. Now, the judge is the main one for everyone, correct?
Yes, the judge
Yeah.
is the master saboteur, and
Mhm.
usually there's another saboteur at play. So I found myself recently in a situation where I was judging, but I was judging because of my hyperachiever and my hyper rational. So
Mhm.
somebody was threatening or challenging those saboteurs. And then I judged them based on that lens that I put on the situation. Like they're making stupid choices, they're wasting my time. In reality, and I was able to intercept it using the saboteur assessment, and the techniques of the sage and getting self command over it, and realize, have empathy for her, because realize she was just being her, right? She
Yeah.
wasn't doing it. It's one of my favorite lines. They're not doing it to you; they're doing it because of them,
Yeah.
right? And so all I can control. I mean, these are like all the little things all the little quotes I have, and they're not original to me. I get it, but all you can control is yourself and your own reaction.
Yes.
So that's really probably at the base of the saboteur. How to manage your saboteurs is recognizing that and finding a better response to it. And there's a bunch
Yes.
of techniques for better responses, but
Yeah, let's talk about that. I think it's interesting as we're here on Power to the People Pleasers, and let's just be clear. If you are listening to it, doesn't mean that you're one of your highest saboteurs is people pleaser. It doesn't mean that at all. For me, that's the case, but it doesn't mean that at all. And I'll post the link for you to go take the assessment from Positive Intelligence, so you can check it out for yourself. But you've mentioned the word sage a few times. So I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit and talk about what are these strategies that we can use to help us get to that state.
yeah, so I mean the whole process with this when your saboteur is about to get triggered, and you're supposed to practice these even without them being triggered, like put in pretend mode. But first you just need to stop and take a breath.
Mhm.
And it's really a little bit of mindfulness. It could be as short as 10 seconds. It could be deep breathing, using one of your senses in some quick mindfulness activity to sort of stop the natural response. And then there's 5 sages. And sorry, I was just looking away because I was bringing them up so I wouldn't
Yeah,
so I wouldn't
that's
get them
great.
wrong.
That's great.
The first one is empathy, and that's just having empathy either for yourself, because you could be judging yourself,
Mhm.
right? That's very common. Or you could be judging other people. And the concept is, picture yourself when you were 5, before these saboteurs took place, and you were just a normal person, right? Without these bugaboos about you. So that first one is having empathy, which may not get you past it, but at least calms the stress response.
Yeah.
The second one is explore. It's really just observing without judgment. What's really going on here, right? As you know, with my friend, right? What's really going on? She's not really trying to piss me off. She's just trying to
Mhm.
figure things out the way she figures it out. So taking that filter
Mhm.
off of your view.
I would
uh,
add it's not about me.
right. It's yes. It's almost never about
It's
you,
almost never about us.
right? Right. The third one is to innovate. And one of the innovation techniques, and anybody who's heard anything about improv knows yes and, but it's a version of yes and, which I love, and I love it more for my coaching business. I think yes and is great for improv because you can end up in some really crazy places. When you're trying to innovate for yourself, you don't want to end up in a crazy place. So the concept of yes and 10% is that 10% of what anybody says has some degree of accuracy or truth to it. The other 90% might be garbage. Ignore the 90%, focus on the 10% that you agree on and build on that. So as an example, I could say something like, I want to save on energy, so I'm going to push my car to work. Most normal people would say that's a brain dead stupid idea, right? But there's something good in there, and that's that they want to save on electricity and they want to use their own body energy to do it. So you could say, oh, that's great that you want to use, non-fossil fuels to get to work. What about a bicycle? So you can start to build some ideas that aren't as crazy or stupid as what somebody might be generating with you. And I've used that in my personal life. And, on a topic that somebody very close to me, we have a hard time finding common ground.
Yeah.
You won't be surprised it's politics, right? And we really got, or policy more than politics, but we really got to a common ground on it. It was very successful.
That's awesome.
Yeah. The fourth one is to navigate. And that's, when you're trying to make a decision, to picture yourself at the end of your life, looking back at you right now. What choice would you make? Right? And using that as a way to make better choices without your saboteur interceding in the decision-making process. And then the fifth one is activate. And that's putting yourself in the shoes of the saboteur and anticipating how they might try to sabotage your action. So just sort of getting in front of it.
Very interesting. Thank you. And I know that this self-command muscle, as you said, is where we are practicing being in a sage mode. So let's talk about sage mode. Nobody else knows what this means other than people who've read the book or taken this training. So what the heck does sage mode mean?
I mean, it's just a response without your saboteur. So let's take people pleasing as an example, right? So if you find yourself over people pleasing, because when you people please too much, that could send you into a stress response because you're not taking care of your own needs, right? So before you get to that point, to recognize and have empathy for yourself, right? And realize, okay, I'm doing this because I'm a people pleaser. If I could put my people pleaser aside, hello, people pleaser, why don't you stand over there for a little while? What's the right response here? And you could use the yes and, have empathy for that people pleaser, recognizing that he or she may not be serving me very well right now.
Yeah.
Right. So
that I really like that.
Yeah.
So how are you using this with your clients every day? People that are listening to this and they're feeling stuck or wanting a transition in their life, how are you tapping into saboteur knowledge to help them?
Well, a lot of times the things that are stopping people from doing what they want to do are their saboteurs. So maybe they're hyper vigilant, and so they're worried about all of the things that could go wrong, and therefore they're not taking that first step. Or perhaps they're I guess that hypervigilant would be, they could be a stickler, which is one of the other ones, which is a bit of a perfectionist, right? So until everything's perfect, I'm not going to move forward. So sometimes it's just recognizing that the saboteur is driving their inaction. It's not the thing itself, it's their saboteur that's driving the inaction. So then there's a bunch of, typical coaching around, first of all, recognition of it, but then trying to recognize, what, all of the open-ended questions you might ask to get them to think about what it is that they really, really want, and how
Mhm.
they can get, instead of, I would consider people pleasing a you win type of energy,
Mhm.
right? And trying to move them to a win-win, a we
Yeah.
win,
We
something
win.
along
Yeah.
those lines, right?
Yeah.
Everything doesn't have to be only about you. You can find a we win in those situations.
Yeah. What would you say was the most eye-opening when you were going through this training around saboteurs and learning about yourself? What would you say about that?
I have always known I'm a hyperachiever. Any assessment I've ever taken would tell me that I'm a hyperachiever, and anybody who meets me would tell you very quickly. In fact, people who only knew me for like a weekend wrote, a bunch of. I'm looking at it right now. I have this little thing on the wall. They had to write a word about me, and it was, adventurous and strong and powerful. Like those are all related to that people pleaser.
Yeah.
So that wasn't an aha moment, but the hyper
Mhm.
rational was a bit of an aha moment. And I
Mhm.
knew I was a controller. I've really tried to manage all of that because that could come across really aggressively.
Mhm.
So I've spent a lot of time in my life softening all of those. And
Mhm.
the saboteur assessment became a really good tool to really intercept it, not just soften
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that there is a component of mental fitness. That's one of the things that I personally took away the most from understanding how to move into the sage energy, the more aligned thinking to, you know, responding on behalf of yourself that isn't the saboteur talking. Can you talk a little bit about the mental fitness side of positive intelligence?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not as familiar with mental fitness as a discipline,
Mm,
so
okay.
I may have a hard time talking about that. So if you could elaborate a little bit more about sort of what that is, I
Yeah.
could definitely translate it.
Yeah, so thinking about, when we were back in that training course and he was having us do things like pushing our toes into the ground, right? And rubbing our fingers to bring ourselves really back into the present moment. Those are some things that I've been using from the mental fitness training that he did. And I'm curious, it sounds like you're really helping people through the saboteur side of things. Have you used the mental fitness
Oh,
side?
oh, definitely, definitely.
Mhm.
Those are really important. That's the mindfulness that I was talking about. Like
Yes.
those are really important to get out of your natural response, calm
Mhm.
your nervous system down, and drive it towards a more positive response.
Mhm.
And I even did a whole program at this yoga retreat in the
Cool.
Berkshires
Yeah.
that is called Kripalu. Maybe they should pay me for advertising for them, but on resilience training. And
Okay.
they did the same things. It was all resilience is all about, you know, before or during, before you get into that stress response, um, doing mindfulness regularly, meditation, not just in the morning, which is what Shirzad's point was. Doing it
Mm.
in the morning is great, but that doesn't last the day. You
Mm.
want to sort of do a little bit. It could, again, be 10 seconds throughout the day, could even be during a meeting, because you could just be
Mhm.
observing what's, the visuals of the meeting, using the senses of your eyes, your eyesight, to bring you back to a sort of more centered place.
Mhm.
And, probably, this might be something you want to cut out. But the other thing I learned at Kripalu through all of this mindfulness, we were doing it all day long, is I can tend to have gastrointestinal issues, and it
Mhm.
completely calmed those down too. So the effect on your body is beyond just your mental, it's also physical.
Well,
It turns out to be wonderful.
it makes sense though, right? If you think about the deep connection to the stress that we're having is our hormones are flowing through because of that stress response. So I'm not surprised that you noticed a difference
Mhm.
inside,
Yeah,
right?
I even have a blog post on it with a really bad name, so I won't.
Oh, Well, I'm excited. As we're getting close to the end of this session, I want to highlight that I will be dropping a link where these, with all of in the show notes, and there's an opportunity to get on your newsletter where you can receive the blogs. And I'm going to go look for this blog post.
It'll be very clear when you see it.
Amazing. So as we wrap up our discussion today, when we're talking about helping people to know what their saboteurs are and to move, not necessarily past them, but through them and go to a more healthy state of thinking and stress response, what are any last words of wisdom or tips or guidance that you would leave the people who are listening today?
Well, I would suggest to go take the saboteur assessment, and I think you did say you were going to provide the link.
Yeah.
It's it goes back to almost the step 1 of the 12-step program for AA, right? Recognizing who you are and some of the things that may get in the way of your happiness and success is really important to being able to achieve that happiness and success. And then you can start to take those first steps, which lead to the next step and the next step and so on and so forth.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, it was so great to have you on the show today. And for people who want to connect with you, how best can they connect with you after listening?
Well, my website is www.tobyadamson.com. I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter as Coaching by Toby is the name of my company. So look forward to hearing from you.
Awesome. And all those links will be below in the show notes as well. Toby, you are awesome. And I know you're making real change for people and helping them, get unstuck and make those transitions with more ease and flow. So I want to thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Amy.
And to all of our listeners, please rate the podcast, leave a comment, help this get broadcast to more people. And I want to thank you for tuning in to Power to the People Pleasers. Once again, please stay tuned for the next episode coming soon.